Hi, everyone, and welcome to Homefront Rising 2020. We are really excited to have you joining us online. Today, we're going to be talking about military spouse voting, past, present, and future. And hopefully everyone can hear me. Please, if there are any audio issues or tech issues, let us know in the chat. But my name is Libby Jamison, and I am a proud Navy spouse and the past president of one of the past presidents of the Military Spouse JD Network. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but we'll give folks a chance. I can see folks are still joining, so we'll let people get on and get connected and all that good stuff. And while that happens, I would like to give a little bit of background on Homefront Rising and the history of Homefront Rising. So Homefront Rising, hopefully most folks know that it is a nonpartisan initiative aimed at educating military spouses and equipping them to lead, especially in public service roles. And how Homefront Rising came to be, I know we have one of the founders on the line, so I'm telling her own story to her, but want to make sure everyone kind of understands the background. Is Homefront Rising was the genius idea of three military spouses, Donna Honeycutt, Mary Redding Smith, and Lauren Wittenberg Weiner. And they were sitting around in DC in the fall of 2013 during the government shutdown, and maybe a few adult beverages involved, but discussing their frustrations with the shutdown and the seeming lack of understanding from decision makers about the impact that it was going to have on military families, especially. And I think most of us on this webinar can relate that our lives are so uniquely controlled by federal decision makers. So they decide where our service member will be deployed and for how long, what they will be paid, what retirement benefits they will receive, our child care and health care. So many things are controlled, but yet there aren't military spouses as part of those decision makers. So I think we all know military spouses are incredible advocates, and we can look back to the history of the National Military Family Association 50 years ago, founded to advocate for Gold Star spouses. And so we know there are incredible military spouse advocates, and we have a seat at the table for many of these discussions, but military spouses have not been in that group of decision makers. And so how do we make that happen? And so that was the beginning of Homefront Rising, the fall of 2013. By spring 2014, the first conference was held in Washington, D.C., and military spouses came from all over the country and the globe for a day of education and training, and heard from great folks like Tammy Duckworth and Jim Bridenstine and other leaders, veterans, military in this space, really encouraging military spouses to step up and run for office and lead in these public service roles. And so since 2014, we've held a conference, say almost annually, maybe not every year, but we've held a conference about annually in Washington, D.C., continuing with that networking, bringing military spouses and leaders in the political space together. We've taken it on the road to Tampa and San Diego and Seattle, and made great partnerships with folks like Veterans Campaign and the National Military Family Association, and some of the folks on the call that I'll introduce you to in a bit. And hoped to be with you all in a room together today. Obviously, with the coronavirus pandemic, we took it online, and so this is our first kind of foray into the digital world, and we're really glad that you're here with us for that. And so one other piece on the history, I want to say thank you to Military Spouse JD Network. I have my mug right here. And MSJDN is the home to Homefront Rising. For those who don't know, MSJDN is a bar association for military spouse attorneys. So it supports attorneys and law students who are also military spouses in assisting them with licensing and employment issues, and has been a great home for Homefront Rising. And although MSJDN is supportive of those in the legal profession, Homefront Rising is for all military spouses, and our goal is to empower every military spouse to lead. So just a little bit of background and history on Homefront Rising. Let's go forward here. Oops. So we hope that you will share with us and engage today. You can use the hashtag Homefront Rising. We're on all of the social media platforms, so share there, invite other folks to join in the conversation, and you can ask questions there. There's also a chat feature here in the GoToWebinar platform, so please, use that to ask questions, and we'll try and incorporate them as we go along. But there will also be a Q&A period at the end, so definitely stick around for that and have your questions ready. And with that, we'll set the scene a little bit first. So I'm going to talk about military spouse voting past. You kind of get the Christmas Carol spirits, past, present, and future here. So I am going to talk about the history of military spouse voting, and then Sarah Streyder, an Air Force spouse and director of Secure Families Initiative, is going to talk about military spouse voting in the present. So what does that look like for military spouses who are trying to vote? We know that can be a challenge as we move around so much. So where do we vote? How do we make that happen? But also, how do we amplify our vote as military spouse leaders? How do we have that discussion with others in our community? And then we have Jocelyn, Benson, Army veteran spouse, and Michigan Secretary of State, who will be talking about the future of voting. So what does that look like as we become a more digital society? Do we go online? And how do we keep elections secure? And what does the future look like for military families? So she is on the front lines of this every day, and we're excited to hear from her. So I am going to kick off. We're going to go back to 1848 and the Seneca Falls Convention and talk about the fight for the vote for women, and certainly recognize that that not all military spouses are women. I think it was around 90% last time I looked, but I think this is an important piece to understand and how this fight played a role and impacted military spouse voting. And certainly there were efforts surrounding women's right to vote pre-1848, but well, we have a limited window here today, so that's where we're going to start. And Seneca Falls was the first women's rights convention in the United States. And I'm going to read this so I get it correct. It advertised itself as a convention to discuss the social, civil, and religious condition and rights of women. And at Seneca Falls, they considered 11 different resolutions, some having to do with equal access to jobs, equal rights within a church, and interestingly enough, the one resolution that did not pass unanimously involved the right to vote. So still, a contentious issue at the time. But that leads to 1850. The national movement is launched at another convention, and followed in 1851 by Sojourner Truth speaking at a women's rights convention in Ohio, and gives the famous Ain't I a Woman speech. And if you haven't read that, I really encourage it. She was speaking to the women's issues, but also the importance of including African American women in the movement. And if you Google the Sojourner Truth Project, there's a recreation of giving the speech. There's a transcript of the speech. So certainly encourage folks to check that out. Fast forward quite a few years, we get the first territory, not state, but Wyoming becomes the first to pass universal women's suffrage. Other states follow here and there, but there's no, cohesive movement across the states at this point. Fast forward again, a very large number of years, and we finally get the first woman to be elected to Congress. So Jeanette Rankin from Montana is elected, and she's the first woman. She's one of the very few suffragettes that's elected, and she's the only person to vote against U.S. involvement in World War I and World War II. But a really fascinating woman, and she said, "I may be the first woman member of Congress, but I won't be the last." And certainly that's been the case, although we're still waiting on the first active duty military spouse to be elected. So certainly still ceilings to shatter there. And so 3 years after Congresswoman Rankin is elected, Congress passes the Women's Suffrage Amendment. It was first introduced in 1878, finally passes in 1919. And a year later, the 19th Amendment is ratified by enough states to become law, and gender is removed as a barrier to voting. And certainly other barriers remained. We know that race continued to be a barrier, and we saw that throughout the civil rights movement in the 60s and beyond. But that is a quick kind of snapshot. I would say if you're interested in more information, the Newseum, if you're familiar with the Newseum, they had a really great exhibit when they were here in DC before they shut their doors last year. But you can still check them out online, and there's a really great interactive women's suffrage timeline, so you can check that out. And a couple other resources for folks who are interested in celebrating 100 years of the 19th Amendment this summer. The first is the 2020 Women's Vote Centennial Initiative, and so you can check out their website here, and we're tweeting out these resources on the Homefront Rising Twitter feed, so you can check that out. But this has some really great resources on activities, maybe some projects you can build into your new homeschool routine if that's what you have going on at home right now. But a host of information there, so definitely check that out. And the other one that I thought was really neat is the National Votes for Women Trail. So you can see from the slide, there's sites all across the United States, and the website is really great. And so if you do want to get out in a safe and socially distant manner and check out some of these sites, definitely do that. It's a great way to kind of bring that history to life and celebrate the 100 years of the 19th Amendment. And so what does this mean for women and for military spouses more broadly? So we can see that in the 100 years, the vote has increased for women. The number of female voters has now exceeded the number of male voters in every presidential election since 1964, and the percentage of female voters has exceeded the male voters, so both the number and the percentage. But I think as military families, we can relate that this did not happen overnight. A lot of times we work so hard and you get that rule passed, you get that change made, but the implementation is a whole other issue. And I think we know that pretty well as military families, and that was certainly the case for the vote. And I think there's a really interesting story that shows that. So we're going to go back to 1923. I'm going to set the scene a little. So nationally, the political world and the military world, there was very clear separation at the time. The history tells us that only about 1 out of 500 service members voted at the time, and most veterans would not engage even after leaving the service. They would not run for office. You know, a few maybe high profile examples like Teddy Roosevelt, but for the most part, the kind of civil military divide was strong, and there was a lot of separation between those two worlds. And then, as we've just discussed, women had just recently won the right to vote. So that's kind of the national scene. Outside of Camp Marfa, which is out in the boonies of West Texas, if you Google it, there's some really cute glamping. You can go glamp there now and enjoy some history in comfort. But at the time, there was an Army outpost there. And in the county outside of the base, there were 2 candidates running for sheriff. And one had 2 daughters, and they were both married to officers at Camp Marfa. And so he thinks, well, this is great. Women can now vote. I'm going to go round up all of the military spouses, tell them why they should vote for me, and get them to the polls. So a very forward-thinking candidate here. And at the time, state law barred convicted felons, insane persons, and members of the regular army, which is quite a trio, but they were not allowed to vote. Military spouses were not restricted in their voting. So this candidate, he puts his plan in action, he gets the military spouses to the polls, and he wins by a fairly narrow margin. And the losing candidate gets wind of what happened and files a complaint, and all hell breaks loose. An inspector general is brought in, judge advocates are brought in, the soldiers are chastised by their command, civilian authorities are brought in, and ultimately a determination is made that invalidates the military spouse votes. And they say that because the soldiers could not become residents of Marfa and vote, therefore military spouses automatically also could not become residents. So their votes are taken away. And there's actually a journal, a Army officer journaled this. You know, he goes home at lunch, which is great. His wife is super excited. She had gone and voted. You know, the women's vote is still very new. She's very excited. She had asked the men for a cigar after she put in her vote, and he is just horrified. And he thinks this is going to destroy the relationship between the Army and the town, and writes in his journal that, you know, the military should not be influencing local elections in any way. So that to me is just a really kind of fascinating snapshot of the military spouse vote at that time. Now we're going to jump forward 50 years to 1973, when the right of military families to vote is codified in federal law. And so the Uniform and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, which is a mouthful, required states to allow military families and service members to vote by absentee ballot. And so we, you know, don't have time to explore everything that happened in that 50 years. But I think we can look to, you know, increased participation of women voting, certainly World War II, and the massive number of veterans that come out of that, and their engagement in the political world and advocating after World War II, to see that there's been a significant shift in the attitude toward military voters. And so hopefully most folks are familiar with the federal voting assistance program run through the DoD to make sure that service members and their families are aware of their right to vote and are supported in their voting. So again, huge shift from 1923 to 1973, and certainly now. So coming up to today, 2018, we look at a study from the Institute of Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse University, and conducted with the support of MOA. We see that only 36% of active duty spouse respondents polled in that study vote in every election. So a lot of spouses vote in the presidential or federal elections, but not necessarily at the local or state level. And although 70% of service members feel supported and encouraged to vote, only 27% of spouses feel that way. So clearly still some work to be done. That's why we're talking about this today. And we hope that everyone in this training today will certainly feel encouraged to vote, but also to go out and talk to other military spouses about participating in that as well. And so I think that kind of brings me to the end of military spouse voting past. We do want to do a quick poll. So hopefully this will work for everyone. We're going to launch this. And hopefully everyone can see that and participate in the poll. And while that's happening, I am going to turn over to Sarah Streyder to dive into military spouse voting in the present.
Thanks, Libby.
Yeah, that should work. So you should have control now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Awesome.
Okay.
And will you close the poll when you're ready?
Yes. Okay.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to click share screen. Sweet. All right. Looks like it's working. Does it look good on your end, Libby?
Yeah, good to go.
Awesome. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Good to meet you all. My name is Sarah Streyder. And as Libby mentioned, I am an Air Force, active duty Air Force spouse, as well as the director of the Secure Families Initiative. Our mission is very similar to Homefront Rising. We want to mobilize military spouses and family members to be active voters and political advocates within the political process. We think it's specifically important and urgent for military families to be advocates on foreign policy issues in particular. We know better than most the consequences that wars abroad have here at home, and we think that that story is really important to tell so that our country makes more informed decisions over war and peace. So that's what we focus on as an organization in our advocacy, but a big portion of our programming is just focused on the voting and the advocacy training piece, so that if you're a military family member, no matter the issue is that you want to get involved in, you feel empowered to do so. And so today, Libby has asked me to give our relational voter outreach training, which I'll get to in a second. But first, I'm going to talk about registering to vote. So part one of military voters today, how to register yourself to vote, which is especially important as next month there is a slew of primaries in different states. And of course, as we all know, this November is a big presidential general election. So the first step to determining how to register to vote is deciding where you're going to vote, because as military folks, often we have ties to multiple locations. And the first step is to decide where's your voting location going to be. You have a choice between local to where you live now, or voting what you consider to be back home in your state of residence. So you should vote. I'm going to start by talking about the easy choices. So if you are a veteran spouse, a spouse of a National Guard or of a reservist, chances are you live where you vote because that's your only state of residence. You don't move around in the same way that, say, active duty military do. So the choice for you is pretty simple. You should be voting local to where you live. Now, if you're on the active duty side of things, if you're, say, a service member who's currently deployed away from your normal voting jurisdiction, or if you're stationed overseas, and that would include the family members, you don't have, especially if you're OCONUS, you don't have a state where you live now. All you have is your state of residence. So again, that makes your choice pretty simple as to where you're going to be voting, which is back to whatever your state of residence is. Typically, that's the state that's on your W-2 or your LES. Now, if you're active duty and you're not deployed or not stationed OCONUS, if you are stationed CONUS, technically you have a choice whether to vote local to where you live now or vote back in that state of residence. There are a few considerations to have in mind. Part of it's preference, but part of it's also to get into residency rules. There are some states that are very strict about residency and voting. If you want to maintain a residency somewhere where you don't live, voting through that residency is a great, easy way to demonstrate your continued connection to that area, especially if that's where you want to end up after you leave service. It's the best way I mean, this is the state that determines where you get in-state tuition or where you pay state income taxes. And so voting in a residence is clearly the simple way. But there are some states where you might be able to vote local to where you live without switching residency, without declaring residency local. And if that's the case and you prefer to get involved in, say, local elections, that's a choice that's up to you. You just want to make sure that you read the fine line of both the place where you live now and whether it requires a residency change in order to vote, and of course the rules back home, and whether voting is the best way to maintain that residency if that's your choice. So where you vote determines how you register. So if you fall in that first camp of voting local to where you live now, there's no special system for you when it comes to registration. You get to just, as a military person, you get to just use normal civilian channels. You can go to your state's election commission website. Some states will allow you to register fully online. Others will make you print something out and mail it in. Either way, just make sure you're paying attention to deadlines. Also, you can go to our website. We have a quick link there. So this is the Secure Families website homepage. If you click on that big register to vote banner at the top of our site, it'll take you to this, which is a great form for registering to vote with our partners, Register to Vote. And what's great about using this form is you can either submit it directly online, or if your state is one that requires you to submit it by mail, Register to Vote will print out your pre-populated voter registration form. They'll actually mail it to you, so you don't have to have access to a printer. All you have to do is sign it, and then they will include return postage as well as the return address to the election office to turn it in. So all you got to do is stick it in an envelope and put it in the mail. It's the lowest barrier to entry of any registration by mail that we managed to find, which is why we wanted to make it available to our members. Now, if you're like the majority of active duty members, which means you vote away from where you live, you do have your own special registration system through the federal postcard application, which is managed by the Federal Voting Assistance Program, or FVAP. The federal postcard application, again, can be found on our website. If you click on the Vote tab, you'll find this link at the top of the page, and it'll take you to a PDF of the FPCA. This is something that you'll print out, sign, and mail in, and they can help you find the address to mail it in online. The great thing about this form, the FPCA, for folks that are, again, registering to vote away from where they live, is you get a 2-for-1. You get to register to vote and request an absentee ballot, all with the same form. Just be aware, if you're a voter like this, you're using the FPCA to register back home, you don't have to re-register every year, but you do have to request an absentee ballot every year. Every year you request it for whatever elections are that year, multiple primaries, a general, you name it, but you do have to keep that updated. So just keep that in mind if you're one of these voters. Now, not only, this was a really quick overview because I want to get to the bulk of my presentation, which is on relational voter outreach. So if I went too fast for you, and if you have some questions or if you want to dig a little more deeper into this, I've got a few options for you. We've laid out this presentation I just gave in a step-by-step guide that's available on our website. There's also a video version of me doing a slightly more in-depth version of this presentation on our Facebook page at Secure Families Initiative. So those resources exist. You're always welcome to email us if you have any questions. Maybe you have a tricky situation and it's hard to determine what fits for you. We've coached a number of people through this process, and we're more than happy to do that. In fact, earlier this year, we helped a military spouse who became a US citizen for the first time register to vote for the first time, which was super exciting. So we're more than happy to work one-on-one with folks as well. And finally, later this month, we are going to be hosting this event, a Q&A with FVAP expert Megan Kelly, who works at FVAP, so she's the analyst that kind of knows all the answers. We're going to be doing a Facebook Live Q&A with her, so that if you have any real-time questions that you want to ask, you can, and she'll be able to answer as well. All right, that was part one about how to register yourself to vote. Hopefully I gave you a good sense of it, as well as resources for more detail. Now I'm going to get to my favorite part personally, which is called relational voter outreach, or how do we get our friends and family to vote as well. This is the best way to expand our voter participation rate and up those percentages that Libby was talking about earlier. And I'm wearing my Nebraska shirt today in honor of the fact that that was the duty station I was at when I first learned about this. I got involved in a lot of local and state politics. I was trained on RVO, and so it's really exciting for me to get to share them with our community specifically today. Before I launch into the main training, I want to acknowledge the moment that we're in. COVID-19 has affected all parts of our lives, and election year activities are no different. It may seem like voting, registering to vote, voting, maybe the last thing that people feel like talking about or thinking about, because we all have a gazillion other things going on in our lives. And so there's this natural hesitancy to talk about something that feels less urgent, shall we say. So just a few thoughts about that. First of all, this is going to be an important election because, especially this November, we are going to be electing the leaders that are going to be in charge of rebuilding our country and our economy post-COVID crisis, right? Our public health infrastructure. And so I think it's important to remember that right now, a lot of us feel helpless, like there's very little we can do to solve what feels like a huge out of touch problem. But voting, registering to vote, is a great way of connecting our emotions and channeling them in a productive direction. I'd also say that based on COVID quarantine and all that, folks are connecting virtually at a higher rate than normal. And so this moment actually provides the perfect opportunity to reach out to new layers of context that we have in our life that under more normal circumstances might be less accessible. And finally, I know a lot of our folks have kids who they're trying to homeschool at the moment. And I just wanted to say that this is a nice, safe at-home activity that can insert your civic engagement lesson for the day. So think of it as a 2-for-1 in that way too. All right, so I've talked about why all of this matters. Now, what am I even talking about? What is relational voter outreach? Relational voter outreach is mobilizing our friends and family to vote. It's talking through relationships to get people to vote. When you think about it in your life, think about the people that you know who may share your values, your interests, your goals, but might not always translate that passion into the action of voting. These are the kinds of people in your life that you want to think about turning out to vote. There's so much focus from, normal political campaigns to get people out to vote using stranger to stranger contact, but this is a great alternative by using relationships. And even though, of course, we want everyone to vote, the point is to make this a very easy ask, right? You shouldn't be having to persuade someone to change their closely held beliefs on really hot button issues. Rather, all you're persuading them is to translate belief into action. So this should be a relatively easy lift versus, say, canvassing door to door for a candidate with strangers. Most importantly, the RVO is a research proven tactic, and I'm going to go ahead and remove my head jack in hopes that you can hear the audio clip that I put in the next piece. Oh, it almost kind of worked. So RVO techniques are known to improve voter participation rates by 200%. So relational voter outreach is super effective, and it's one of the reasons why we're focusing on it as a technique today. So not only does it work, but it kind of makes sense that it works because it's so efficient. So if we all are sick of getting telemarketer calls and having to screen numbers we don't recognize, we are less likely to answer the phone if it's someone we don't know, nor are we likely to do something someone tells us if we don't have a relationship with that person. So if we are leveraging our friendships and our family relationships to get folks to get more involved in civic engagement, they're more likely not only to answer the phone, but to listen to what we have to say and to take action as a result. Doing this can expand the capacity of regular campaigns. They only have so much time and resources to reach out to voters and turn out new voters. And I think this is especially important for military spouses and family members. We tend to be excluded by formal campaigns when it comes to this kind of outreach. A lot of us are absentee voters. Campaigns don't tend to think about that. Even when we're in-person voters, campaigns can get really scared about feeling, oh, they're on base, I don't know how to contact them. And so especially those of us who have access to this community, this is a great opportunity for us to turn out these numbers in a way that formal campaigns can't do. And finally, I think having these conversations is extra important because it creates this community of civic engagement. It normalizes the idea that voting and political advocacy is not only a normal part of the military family lifestyle, but in fact a really important one that we can't leave on the table. So now hopefully I've convinced you all that RVO is the best thing since sliced bread. Let's dig into what that actually looks like. So thinking about people in our lives that we can talk to about getting them out to vote. I like to think of it this way. Think about groups of people in your life that you have access to based on, we're going to start with people you might interact with on a daily basis through your job. Maybe you're going to school, or maybe your kids are going to school or sports, or under normal circumstances have a carpool group. What are some of the people you see day to day? Then think about it on a weekly basis. If you practice a certain form of faith and you go to a congregated form of worship, are there people you know through that community? Maybe you're a volunteer or you participate in physical exercise at a gym. Who are people you might know in those spaces? And finally, think about it on a monthly side. Maybe you're part of a book club, or you get your hair done, or there are other businesses that you like to frequent. What are some relationships that you have through each of these spokes in the wheel that you might open up to about something like voting? Another way to think about it in this particular moment, who are some of the friends and family members you're reaching out to schedule virtual hangouts? Those folks that even if you can't meet in person, you still really want to stay in contact with. Some other ways to think about who in your life could use talking to. If you're the kind of person who has time for a holiday card, I am not, but for those who are, who's on that list? Who are some of the folks you have access to through that? Maybe there's someone in your life who had a recent life change. I can clarify a little bit of what that means. If someone just moved, that means that they have a new address that either affects their registration or where their absentee ballot gets sent. They, at very least, even if they are already a voter, are going to have to update their registration materials, and you reaching out would be a helpful reminder. Other recent life changes, if someone gets married and decides to change their last name, that's another reason they may have to update their registration materials. And finally, like I mentioned, maybe someone became a US citizen for the first time. All of these are recent life changes that would warrant a friendly reminder, hey, don't forget to update your voter registration materials. A lot of us have friendships that we don't even see in person anymore, but we keep in touch with from back home. Some of us even have relationships, friendships that are entirely virtual, that only exist on social media. Think about those people in your life. And finally, I think that this is one of the most useful tidbits. Work backwards from what mobilizes you to vote. Because whatever it is that drives you to commit to filling out that form, getting that absentee ballot, putting it into the mail, whatever it is that motivates you likely motivates other people within your life. And so if you work backwards as to what got you to vote for the first time, find other people to whom that may apply and use that as an opening for that conversation. All right, so we've talked about the who we're talking to. Now let's talk about the how. What does this even look like? There are two different approaches you can take when it comes to turning people out to vote in your life. You can either incorporate this kind of a topic into normal conversations you're already having, or you can treat it as you would any other canvas or phone banking. You set aside a time in your day, you make yourself a list, and you call up one at a time each person on your list to have this conversation. Make it a little more intentional. Whichever way that you do it, both work, and I've seen people really enjoy both strategies. Normally, I would encourage these conversations to be in person, but as that is not an option right now, phone calls are kind of the next best thing because you get to have that real-time conversation. And of course, text and email is behind that as another form of communication, a little less personable, but a little more convenient. Obviously, what's most important, sorry, I keep clicking the wrong arrow, is to reach out to folks in whatever it means you're most likely to reach them. If you know that they are terrified of the phone, maybe just send them a text, whichever works for them. All right, what does this conversation look like? It should be pretty quick. It should only take about 3 to 5 minutes. So don't intimidate yourself by thinking that this is a big ask. You can catch up for a little minute and then pivot into business. Something like, hey, there's an important election coming up and I want to make sure you are planning to vote. A really easy kind of a pivot. Don't overthink it. Casual is good. You don't have to make it seem like you're giving some sort of speech. Something we encourage folks to incorporate into their conversations about registering to vote is asking if they have a plan. If you get someone to visualize when they're going to vote, how they're going to vote, where their polling place is, all of those, the planning mindset not only increases the likelihood that someone is going to act upon that and actually turn out to vote, but it helps them anticipate potential obstacles so that we don't have any election date lostness or lateness. And finally, offer to help. If they're not sure if their registration is up to date or if they're an in-person voter and they're not sure where their polling place is, we have widgets on our website, securefamiliesinitiative.org, that can help with both of these. So make the offer to kind of help walk them through these potential problem areas. A few tips. Number one, practice. Do not be shy about practicing in front of a mirror, a spouse, a pet, or us. Again, feel free to reach out if you want to kind of practice your relational voter outreach combo skills. Another form of practice, start with the people in your life who you think are going to be the most open to this kind of a conversation, and start with them. Put them first. It'll help you get some of the kinks out, so by the time you get to the conversations you're not looking forward to as much, you're a little more smooth and into it. Be enthusiastic. Never expect your audience to be more excited about what you are talking about than you. It is less likely to feel weird or awkward if you just smile and plow right through. Then people are more likely to be like, oh, okay, this is cool. I'll follow along. Feel free to share your example, especially when it comes to your plan of how you plan to vote. If you're an absentee voter or an in-person voter, this is actually good, even a lead into the conversation. Hey, I just registered to vote. By the way, are you registered? I can help if you're not. This is a great way of making it more relatable to your audience. And finally, if you stumble upon someone who is super enthusiastic, you know, they're a dedicated voter, they can't wait till election day, this is their jam, encourage them to ask others in their life. Pass it along. Let's continue expanding our voter participation by getting them to canvass their own friends and family. So those are some tips. I know every once in a while we'll hear some concerns with this kind of a thing. The most common concern being this kind of conversation feels awkward. What if someone gets mad at me for bringing up something as touchy as voting and politics? Well, first of all, I mean, voting is very different from asking them who they're going to vote for or what they're going to vote on, right? Simply the ask about, are you going to participate in something that is part of your civic duty, should feel a little less awkward and imposing than other conversations. And chances are, I would just say, someone you're talking to is going to appreciate the reminder. They might lose sight of when deadlines are. Like I said, even some of the most dedicated voters, if they're an absentee voter, they have to update their registration every year to make sure they're getting their absentee ballot. So in my experience, majority of people I've had these conversations with have actually appreciated the fact that I've taken time out of my day. Plus, at that point, I've now signaled, hey, I'm someone who cares about this sort of thing. So if you want to talk more or if you have questions, I can now be a resource for you. Another concern, what if someone says, well, my vote doesn't count? How do you respond to that sort of thing? Well, funny timing, I did just publish an article in the Military Families magazine today that delves into this concern specifically. So go to that article. I'm happy to link to it later for more details. But at its core, even if your individual vote doesn't impact the outcome of any one single election, your vote does permanently leave an impact on your district, because you, by participating as a voter, shape what the average voter demographics of your district look like, which is a big impactful source of how people run, who runs, what they run on, how they contact voters. A lot of campaigns make decisions based on these average voting demographic measurements. So for me, every single time that I vote, I make my district younger and more female simply by casting a ballot, even when my ballot, my individual vote, doesn't make the difference between one person getting elected and the other. That's a permanent impact that I make. Additionally, I, as an individual, when I create a consistent voting record, I am more likely to be reached out to by campaigns and be heard of in issues than if I were not a voter. Because again, campaigns have to prioritize and make decisions, and they tend to prioritize consistent voting records. So those are just some thoughts that relate to that common concern. Another concern, I'm scared to do this because I'm scared they're going to ask me a question I don't know the answer to. Don't be scared of that. Google it. Ask us. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know, but I'll look it up for you. Often that makes you look a lot more relatable than if you had a ready answer to a question. Oh, I skipped the order here. Some people are not inclined to do this activity because they perceive everyone in their life as already being consistent voters, so there's not a point of having this conversation. First of all, congratulations on having really civically engaged friends. I know I always have friends that are still less than fully consistent voters. But even if you know folks already vote, again, it doesn't hurt to give a reminder, because a registration or an absentee ballot registration might be coming up that they've lost track to, especially when this is PCS season right before the election. So it's good to keep on folks' radar. And finally, there is a perennial concern that doing anything political might hurt your spouse's career or hurt as a military spouse, your ability to make friends. I don't think this concern applies to talking about voting as much as other forms of political advocacy. And so I'm not going to dive into the super details in this training right here, right now. But I will just plug that we do an entire training that delves into this problem of politics in the military and how to wrestle with this concern. So I would definitely encourage, if this is something weighing on your heart, join us and have a conversation with other military spouses about who've gone through it as well. All right. Talking to people about voting and turning them out to vote is going to look different from all of us. Some of us are going to look like this cat, very sweet and shy and unassuming. Other of us come across a little more loud and in your face. This is definitely the kind of spirit that I embody the closer that I get to November. Hopefully none of us cross a line into becoming creepy like this Liam Neeson meme. But whatever your style is, make it work for you. Personally, being that middle megaphone kind of person, encouraging people I know to vote has become one of my shticks. Like, people come to expect it and actually find it a rather endearing part of my personality. And so, you know, it might feel awkward at first, but the more regular it becomes, I think the more people in your life will come to really appreciate and embrace you for it. So just leave on that encouraging. All right, I've got one more minute. I'll probably spill over a couple minutes if that's okay, Libby, but I want to leave you with some action items before I hand it over to the Honorable Jocelyn Benson. There are 3 things that you can do today. First and foremost, we are launching a vote tripling challenge through Secure Families Initiative, where if you fill out this little card, normally they look, Libby, can you see my webcam?
Yes.
Okay, great. So normally they look like this little card right here, where on the back you fill out your name. I have obviously blocked this person's phone number for privacy reasons, but then you also give the name of 3 people in your life whose vote you want to help triple this election cycle. I've got screenshots on the screen. We've translated this card into a form. So if you really want to, commit to tripling your vote by getting 3 other people to commit to voting this election cycle, and you want to be held accountable to that goal, in Libby's after action email, I'm going to include a link to this form so you can fill it out. And as we get closer to the election, we will send a friendly text reminder. Hey, have you talked to so-and-so? If not, this is how many days they have until a voter registration deadline or an absentee ballot request deadline. So I would definitely encourage you to join our vote tripling. The most exciting part of it is that we are going to be building a paper chain here at SFI headquarters to track how many people our community is turning out to vote this year, as a nice visual and colorful piece of evidence of the kinds of work that we're doing today. So get your names added to the chain by filling out that form. Second course of action that you can take right now with coronavirus, going in person to vote has become a lot scarier for folks and a lot more dangerous. And we believe at SFI that no person should have to choose between their health and exercising their right to vote. So we think that states should really expand access to vote by mail, whatever that looks like for their state, offering it without excuse, offering it as a sort of default, whatever. We really want this to be part of the plan, especially come November. And so we thought that this was an issue that was a great example of how our military community can lend support beyond just our immediateness, right? Because a lot of us already have access to vote by mail if, say, we're an absentee voter. We want other people to have the same privilege, the same access. So right now we are focusing on calling Congress to ask that they include funding for vote by mail expansions in the subsequent stimulus bills we expect them to pass. At some point this year, our lobbying is going to pivot a little bit and focus more on governors and legislators at the state level to focus on implementation. So when you're ready to make that move, make sure you're following us on SFI social media channels. But if you're interested in kind of taking this action, we have a script on our website that can help step you through what a conversation should look like. So you don't have to be too intimidated about coming up with lots of information on your own. And then there's one final takeaway action that segues very well into our next presenter. At SFI, we're hosting a petition directed toward the Michigan State Legislature. Right now, they are considering 2 bills, I believe. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there are 2 bills that will, I think, there we go, Bills 117 and 297, that would allow overseas military service members the opportunity to cast their ballot electronically. This is a system that 31 other states already have in place for overseas military members. But unlike every single one of those 31 other states, Michigan's current bill specifically excludes spouses and of-age children or dependents, which we do not like and think should be remedied. So we have a petition that we are trying to target at the Michigan's legislative leadership. There's a handful of folks that we think have the most influence on this bill. And what we're saying is we support this bill. We think it's great. Please pass it. But we'd love for you to amend it before it goes to its full floor vote to include spouses and of-age children, because military spouses and family members face the same logistical barriers to casting a ballot when they are stationed overseas as their military service members. And so we think that they should be given the same access to electronic voting as folks in uniform. And like I said, Secretary of State Benson, who's about to present, can speak a little bit more to the reasons that we feel you can still have a secure system, a reliable system. But what's most important is for us to lend our voice as a community toward this bill in any number of ways. Obviously, if you're a Michigan resident or voter, that connection to this issue very personally is really helpful. But even if you're not, there are still ways that outside the state you can be helpful. You can either tell your story of what it was like to be overseas and how difficult or tricky it was to cast your ballot. Maybe you live in a state where electronic voting is already available. You can testify to its reliability, to how convenient it made it for you to vote. No matter your perspective, it's valuable, and so we'd really encourage you to join us in signing our petition. All right, so that wraps up my 3 parts of my training. I'll be around for the Q&A at the end, like Libby mentioned. If you are interested in participating in different trainings on different topics like this, we offer a whole slate. You can check us out at securefamiliesinitiative.org or follow us on any one of these social media channels. And the best benefit to SFI membership, you get more pictures of my adorable dog, Leo McGarry, who is in fact named after the West Wing character. So yeah, we hope to see more of you joining us there. And now, Libby, I will switch it to Jocelyn, correct?
Yes, if you can do that on your end, that would be great. We'll get Jocelyn up. I wanted to share the results of the poll. We asked if you vote regularly in presidential elections, and this is a very engaged audience. So 77% of the people who are on voted, and 100% of the people who responded said they vote regularly in presidential elections. So that is super exciting. Oops.
So it looks like I was only able to make you presenter. If you could.
Okay. You all get to see my my screen here. Okay, I will. Let's see. All right, Jocelyn, can you hear us? Oh, let's see. I think if you unmute on your end and turn your webcam on, I can put you on the main screen.
Webcam is on.
There we go. Okay. I can hear you. Let's see if I can see you. Okay, so we can hear you, but cannot see you yet.
Is there something I need to do at my end?
I just sent, oh, let's see, send webcam request. Sorry, folks, bear with us on the technology end. Okay, yeah, I'm not sure why we can't see you. Did a request come through to show your webcam?
Nope, I just logged in on the webinar link I was given.
Okay, well, we may have to
Try again.
Oop. Well, while we are getting Jocelyn set up, those are the results from the poll. So 100% of folks vote regularly in presidential elections, which is fantastic. I'm going to roll out the second one, which is, do you vote regularly in state or local elections? So folks can chime in on that. Would love to see if there is a difference between voting in the federal and the state and local levels.
Is that working?
Okay, I can still hear you. but I don't know why we can't see you. Can other people see Jocelyn? Is it just me?
I can't see her. Jocelyn, if you see the microphone that should be green for you, right under is a little camera icon.
No, I'm using an app.
Oh, I see.
All I see is the survey.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Well, we may just have to go with audio. I'm not sure how on the app it works to share the video.
Is there a web ID or anything like that? Because it just doesn't, I tried to launch it on a web browser and it doesn't, it says it won't launch.
Oh.
Yeah. Just automatically says go to webinar. And then it opens it up.
Oh, here we go. Is this you? Oh, there we go. Now it's showing. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll. There we go. Yay, success. Lawyers and technology. There's a joke in there.
All right, I'll just go like this.
Yep,
I'm using my computer instead of, I usually use my phone for these. All right.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to take myself off screen and turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's great to connect with all of you. I've known a lot of you over the years and really appreciate everything you've done. And certainly one of my top priorities since taking office has been ensuring that we have modern and secure options for our voters who are stationed overseas on military orders to have their ballots returned and counted. So I think Sarah's presentation went through a lot of those challenges and a lot of those needs. But I've seen also now firsthand how important it is for your voices as spouses to be heard. And I know you just heard about the legislation that we're working on in Michigan that would currently provide the ability for military service members to return their ballots electronically, but does not allow spouses or dependents to do so. And the only reason that legislation is the way it is because the people writing it don't know any military spouses other than me, and so they, I think, need to hear more of the voices from the community to get affirmation of the need and the recognition that spouses, as you all know, serve as well. So I'm excited to talk with you all about your voice, which to me is really critical and missing in the military spouse voice in our politics today. And I think if it's elevated, you'll see not just a lot more benefits for our community, but also for society as a whole. If some of you, I'm not sure if anyone knows my background, my husband was in the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Vicenza, so he was stationed over there for 4 years, and obviously went on several deployments through that, both in Afghanistan and Eastern Europe. I also was serving as the dean of a law school at the time, as well as going back and forth between our home in Michigan and Vicenza. So through that, really saw firsthand and experienced firsthand many of the experiences. He also went through basic training in Georgia and just instantly saw the disconnect and experienced firsthand the disconnect between decision makers and people in the legal sphere, people in positions of authority, and also in really, what our experiences are in the military community on the ground. And then in addition to that, there's, I think, a disconnect that's exacerbated in the halls of power and decision making, where so many citizens are influencing their elected leaders to reflect their values, but oftentimes those values, because of the disconnect between the civilian and the military community, aren't always translated. As you all know, we often refer to military support as a mile wide and an inch deep. And I've certainly seen that in Michigan, really as a result of the fact that, or partially the result of the fact that our community, particularly spouses, but across the board, needs to be more engaged, have a seat at the table, and that really only comes with voting. And so with that, I want to kind of talk specifically about the legislation that has been at the heart of one of the things I've tried to take on since taking office, I previously, when I was dean, started an organization called the Military Spouses of Michigan to work to organize our spouse community in Michigan to have a greater voice. And what we also found was the work of the MSJDN network was so critical to ensuring a lot of changes could happen in Michigan, like the licensing, transferability of licenses for attorneys on military orders, spouses traveling with their partners needing to have licenses to be able to practice law. And with the help of the community, we were able to get that in Michigan. And I know you've had extraordinary success all across the country on that effort, which is just an example of how working together, taking the political process as one that is meant to serve the community, not the other way around, we can actually see great change for the community. So, so to me, while all of this is certainly personal to me, it's also much larger than any individual story. And the thing that I've seen firsthand is that when military spouses are heard, you as one singular voice can impact the stories and the access of thousands of spouses, whether it's through their struggle to cast their ballots and ultimately be heard or run for office or other things. So to give you more background on the specific work we're doing now, one of my top priorities since taking office has been ensuring that we do expand all options for military service members and their families overseas. We estimate in Michigan, which is not a state with an active duty base, we have several National Guard bases and a few other Air Force Base, but Selfridge Air Force Base, but we don't have, we're not a Georgia, we're not a Texas, we're not a state or North Carolina. We don't have a major base, but at the same time, we estimate that an average of 5,000 ballots are sent to Michigan voters deployed overseas on orders from the United States military in any average election. And so with that, we're working to make sure those ballots can be returned safely and securely. And as Sarah's discussed, there's legislation awaiting action in the Michigan state legislature right now that would allow for the electronic return of absentee ballots by military voters using common access cards. So this is a huge step forward, and it's legislation that I've been working on, but have been really discouraged at the fact that we can't get the legislature to see the need to extend the same ability to return ballots electronically to spouses or to dependents. We had spouses testify at a hearing a few months ago prior to the COVID-19 crisis, and we saw really that the legislators making these important decisions on this legislation were simply misinformed and unwilling to listen at that time to those who were seeking to inform them about the need to include military spouses in this legislation. So by your being involved in that effort, or really any effort to ensure military spouses' voices are heard, you'll have a direct impact on decisions that are made that impact your community. So regardless, apart from that, obviously we're in a unique situation right now with voting being impacted through the pandemic and access to government and access to many things being impacted by that crisis. But to me, that's all the more reason why we need to ensure your voices are heard and you're working in your communities to be politically engaged, not just as voters, but as voices for your community, for your perspectives that are often not considered when decisions are made that affect all of us. In the meantime, we're going to continue to work to engage military spouses in Michigan and across the country in advocating in every state for legislation that makes it easier for your voice to be heard. And I'm really encouraged that there are several fantastic military spouses running for office in various levels right now, in no small part due to the work of Homefront Rising and MS, or Military Spouse JD Network. So thank you all for the work that you're doing, and I'm really just here to emphasize that I've now seen firsthand that when your voices aren't heard, then decisions are made, even benevolent, well-meaning ones, that won't really impact and serve the community. It really does take all of us lifting up and organizing and working for the changes that we want to see to make sure anything happens. So with that, I know we have a small time for some Q&A, so I'll turn it back to our moderators and look forward to hearing from all of you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that and for all that you've done to make sure that that our voices are heard. Like you said, sometimes it's very well intentioned, but people just don't understand the situation that military spouses are facing, and so they can unintentionally be excluded. So thank you for continuing to raise those voices. And Sarah, I don't know if you want to come back on screen as well, and we'll open it up for questions. So if folks want to, you can ask questions in the chat. There is a raise your hand function on the platform, and you can do it that way, and we'll unmute you and you can ask, or go ahead and ask through the chat. We'll give folks a couple minutes. We'll see if we get any questions to come in. Someone is texting me that this has been great though, so. Okay, let's see. It looks like we have one here. Okay, Chastine, do you want to go ahead? I think you're unmuted. Do you want to ask?
Hello, hi. So this has been absolutely fascinating, and I love that I've been able to tune it in between baby naps. I had no idea. I'm very embarrassed to say that I did not realize that voting electronically was even an option. I actually just went to my state, Texas, online to request a vote by mail ballot, and I believe maybe Sarah, you said there's only a certain amount of states that do this electronic vote, and then now, of course, as you all were saying, some states are now excluding military spouses overseas. And I guess I kind of understand why they're thinking, oh, well, if they're overseas for two years and not technically living in the state, they shouldn't have a say on what we're doing here. I mean, I guess I kind of get that, but I still don't think it's fair or right. So is there a way we can help get the word out about other states and see if is there some kind of campaign or initiative out there besides Michigan, or any other way that we can? Because this is really, really interesting. I'm just trying to think of ways to stay involved because I'm at home and I'm bored. So I'm trying to help. How can I help?
I will say social media and organizations that organize through social media are one of the most impactful ways that you can, while at home, continue to educate and engage and converse about the issues that are happening. Many states have had, will have multiple elections this year, not just in November. And it is just as crucial that our citizens serving overseas to protect and defend democracy on orders of the US government have the ability to hold those leaders who are making decisions that affect their livelihood, their salaries, their benefits accountable. And so we must take that power, we must embrace it. And yes, it is also frustrating that government oftentimes makes voting something that is something you have to figure out how to do, as opposed to simply obvious. And that's one of the things I've tried to change as Secretary of State. In most states, the Secretary of State oversees and administers elections. And so first and foremost, in most states, including in Texas, you can go to the Secretary of State's website to get information about how to vote, where to vote, and all that, and which states allow you to electronically return your ballot. But I know Sarah's organization and MSJDN as well is doing great work to really connect military spouses to that information as well.
Yeah, first of all, my teammate Kate, who I think is on this call, I don't know if she coined the term or she was the first one I ever heard use it, the term naptivists. Being an activist during nap times, like you mentioned. There are a lot of ways to be a great naptivist. And in fact, Kate wrote a great article we had published in We Are the Mighty about 5 kid-friendly ways to get involved in politics. So on the broader note of staying involved, there are plenty of options that we lay out as well as others. On this issue in particular, access to voting specific for military spouses, it's an issue area that we want to be really involved in at all those different state levels. So if other states bring up legislation, we want to be able to direct our members to weigh in on it. And we want to hopefully even craft and inspire new pieces of legislation moving forward. This is our first year in existence as an organization, so we're still growing our network to have access on the state level of what's happening. It's really hard from kind of the national level to always know what state legislatures are working on, which is why it was awesome that Libby put us in contact with Jocelyn, which is how we even knew about the Michigan bill in the first place. So moving forward, we are really going to rely a lot on our members to tell us when their individual states are doing things. We're going to do our best to keep an eye on. And if other opportunities to take action in other states at different levels pop up, we hope to play a positive role of circulating that information around.
Great, good question. And let's see, Beverly, I can see you raising your hand. I'm going to unmute you. Okay, Beverly, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you all very much. This was so interesting. And I'm a local elected official, and I've also run for state office. I didn't make it, but I tried. I might again. Anyone who knows me knows that I will always be advocating for them to vote. I've done everything possible to help, like, our high school students to register to vote, to get the elderly registered to vote, been able to help with absentee ballots. The process in Massachusetts is actually really good. I have to tell you, I had no idea about the difficulties that military families face in different states, and of course being overseas. On all my husband's deployments, he was able to do absentee ballots, but I think it's definitely because of the state that we live in, Massachusetts. But thank you, because I took copious notes. Now I know there's a whole nother group of people I need to encourage, and I'll do everything I can. And I do want to tell Sarah specifically the Liam Neeson example. I actually wrote a Facebook message in that same vein this year with the primary election, because, you know, on Facebook, it's like, I'm listening to thousands of people complain and rant and rave. They had better have voted or they have no right speaking. And anyway, I love that meme, and I will tell you that I actually frightened a few people into voting. So I don't care how I got them to do it, but they voted because they were afraid of me. So save that meme. It really can work. Thank you all.
As an example, next time I do this training.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I can send you details.
Beverly's an enforcer. I like it. All right. Thanks, Beverly. Okay. Oh, we've got all kinds of questions. Okay. I'm looking in the chat. A question for Jocelyn. What is the biggest challenge you've seen to motivate voter turnout generally in your state?
So we just had an election actually on Tuesday in Michigan, a local election, and turnout in local elections is usually 12%. This Tuesday, it was 25%. It was more than twice the number in a typical local election because people were able to vote from home. We mailed every single registered voter, information on how to vote from home, and gave them the form that they could complete. And all they had to do was drop it in the mail, and then they received a ballot, and they just had to drop that in the mail, and they were done. And I was astounded, and 99% of the citizens who participated in Tuesday's elections were voted through mail. And so even at a time like this, we saw turnout can increase when voting is made convenient and accessible. And I, as someone who does election law throughout my career, we always want to believe that if you make the rules easier, that's what it's going to take to get more people in voting. It's a a lot of people are like, oh, people just don't care. People are apathetic. But none of what I've seen in my year and a half overseeing Michigan's elections, or in my 2 decades working on elections in the past, really demonstrates that. What I've actually found is that if you send a message from government that we care, and we want you to vote, and here's how, and you make it easy, that can have a significant impact on engaging citizens. Obviously, we also need civic education and other things in our schools and blah, blah, better and more investigative journalism, more robust media and ways of getting information about our candidates. But one of the things I've also done since taking office is go to communities with the lowest turnout, because no one's going there. Precincts in our state where voters turnout is in a presidential election, 10 or 12%. These are mostly poor communities, or often in public housing. But I have conversations with those citizens about what we could do better and just listen to them. And expecting, oftentimes I will hear things like, oh, I don't want to vote because it doesn't matter, or my vote doesn't count. In any conversation I've had in those communities, I've never once had someone say to me, I don't vote because I don't think it matters. They universally say, I don't know how to get to my precinct and I don't have a car, or I have a criminal history so I can't vote. To which point I tell them, yeah, actually in Michigan you can vote regardless of your criminal history. And that's the #1 myth that I have to dispel in communities that aren't voting. But I've seen firsthand turnout change when people, when you make voting more convenient. And now we've seen it even just this week with, so that's really been encouraging to me. And it also shows that that there's something we can do beyond just, hoping and communicating and trying to inspire people to vote, to actually get people to vote. I think in some ways, I'll just end by this, in some ways voting is set up, even when you have to go to a precinct, that in a way that government is set up, which is kind of backwards. It's this idea that you come to us to vote, you come to where we tell you, we will tell you where you have to go to cast your ballot, and you can only go there, you can't go anywhere else. I mean, it's this inherent concept that we just accept, that you have to register to vote and fill out a form before you're even allowed to vote, even though voting is a fundamental right. There have been so many barriers, inadvertently or not, that have been created to make voting something that citizens do on the government's terms, when it really should be the government doing everything it can to meet citizens where they're at and make voting happen on their terms. So things like vote by mail start to flip that and make it more about what's best and most convenient for our voters. And so that's been just really encouraging to me. So I would just say it's certainly getting more, you talking to people about voting, making sure people in your community know how to vote is one of the most impactful ways you can get more people engaged.
Great. Yeah, I'm a Washington State voter, and they email the ballot to us. You print it out, fill it out. You get the time to Google what you don't understand, on some of the stuff they're asking you to vote on. And I've just always thought that makes so much sense. And especially, now when it's not great to be going out and standing in line somewhere. Okay, we'll do one more. Michelle Norman, I'm going to unmute you. Okay, Michelle, you're on.
Hi, ladies. Thank you so much today for this session. I have learned so much in this past half an hour or so. So my question is a little bit more detailed. I am an advocate here in Virginia for military families and their education. So obviously being engaged in our local community and our local school board elections are super important. But what we're finding as I've reached out to many of our military spouse community folks here, many have residences outside of Virginia, such as Florida and Texas seem to be the biggest states. And many of them are unwilling to change their home residence because one, state tax, from Texas and Florida is not an option. And then I guess also they're concerned about personal property tax here in Virginia, and also maybe having to change their driver's license. Has anyone been able to get around that? Because I think we would get so much more engagement and be able to make some true impacts and change in our local school board elections if we can somehow make this very easy for our military spouses to not have to go through so many hoops to be able to retain some of the, I guess, the benefits of having their home residence, but be able to vote locally. Thank you.
Thanks. Sarah, do you want to, I don't want to dump that one. Did you want to tackle that?
I can. First of all, if I could wave a magic wand and create policy change, I would personally love a system that treated voting and residency just separately, at least for the military spouse and military service member community, because I agree, Michelle, that I think you'd see a lot more engagement when people feel like they can tangibly interact with whatever it is going on their ballot than back home. And just earlier this week, we had a conversation with Lindsay Simmons, who is a military spouse running for office. And she actually mentioned this great thing about voting, where at one point because she votes back home, and she felt disconnected to things that are happening back home, and as if she didn't deserve to vote in local elections because they didn't impact her. And I mean, it broke my heart, but I think that's a really relatable sentiment for a lot of us. And for her, the turning point was to realize that as being a military spouse, she actually had a value add even as an absentee voter, because she's lived in lots of different localities. She can compare and contrast how different systems work. She had a unique perspective that she thought weighing in on local races, even if it was back home miles away, had actual value. And I remember that epiphany for her was really valuable. When she shared it in our conversation, I kind of grasped onto it to myself. Now, to answer your specific question about like legal residency and stuff, it's kind of an evolving issue. We have friends at the Military Families Mobilized organization who did a bit of a case study on 10 different states to analyze whether residency was impacted by voting. And they found for at least those 10 states, it tended to be the case where their legal preference was they would strongly discourage you from voting separate from your state of residency for fear of losing that residency status. So I want to make sure to give that very informed case study. That said, I'll just share, I vote local to where I am, even though it's not my residence. And I've done that a couple times now because I feel like it's really important to weigh in local elections. It's a lot more accessible to me, and I haven't had a problem. My residency has never been challenged, and there are other ways that I demonstrate my residency back in Washington as well, actually, Libby. That's where I went to school, and that's where we were when my husband signed the dotted line. So, and it's where we want to go back to. So it's a hard question to answer because I want to give good advice. You know, I don't want to be giving advice and get anyone in trouble for it. But I also want to be true to my own story and my own experience and what I've managed to do. And I'm here in Virginia with you, Michelle. So really, it's a state-by-state basis. You know, the best thing to do is to consult your JAG or your legal office if you have a question about your specific residency and the risks that you take on by changing your voting address, kind of divorcing the two. And then hopefully in a future policy, magical wand will make it easier and change it.
Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap there, unless, Jocelyn, did you have anything to add on that?
No, I just want to say thank you for all the work that you guys are doing, and really just know that it's not going to get done without you. Everyone engaged, everyone's a part of this, everyone listening, just know that it's not a question of if you don't do it, someone else will. They won't. The community, our community is so close and close knit, but what you all have demonstrated, what MSJDN and Sarah's work has demonstrated, is that it is up to all of us and all of you to ensure that military spouses' stories are told, that their perspectives are known, and that they're able to influence decisions that are made that affect them, from taxes to education to, you know, so many other things that we've even touched upon in today's call. So just know that with the honor of service comes a responsibility to be engaged, to get your community engaged, to vote, to consider running for office, and to consider other ways of influencing the decision makers in your community to hear your voice and your experience and respond to it.
Awesome. I don't think I can top that. Nothing to add, but thank you. Thank you both for being here and sharing your time and your expertise and your stories as military spouses. And thank you to everyone who joined us on the line. We have been sharing a lot of the resources and the conversation on the Homefront Rising Twitter feed, and we will also send out an email with a lot of the resources we talked about today, so keep an eye out for that. So thank you all, and make sure you're registered to vote. All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.